Johan Galtung, who was born in 1930 in Oslo, holds PhDs in mathematics and sociology and is the founder of Transcend, a network for peace, development, and environment. In 1959, he founded the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, where he created the field of peace studies. Galtung's approach to mediation offers concrete proposals that are intended to give both sides the sense that they are winners.
Let us be aware of what we mean by power. You have the military power to force. You have the economic power to bribe. If you do what I want you to do, there will be some reward coming up, a good deal. Or it could be political decision making. It's decided, and at the top of society they have that power, and they may also have the economic and military. My power is none of this but idea power. So I contribute ideas. It's for the states, the systems, to contribute the other three types of power. And evidently, if at the top they like that idea, they will usually be able to steer those forces. But those forces may also revolt against it. If I take United States of America, I think the economic power of what is by Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex is considerable. It's not a very original position. And the military power of, let us say, Pentagon, CIA, Pentagon Langley, because Langley also does killing, but it's not overt, it's covert, is considerable. The two cooperate. For the White House to stand up against that is not easy. And you see it today. This country is today not run by the White House, it's run by the other two. So it's a question of what's the relative power here. You have to be very strong on the White House side, and you have to know the game. You have to know the game as well as Lyndon Johnson knew it, and yet he capitulated, he gave up. I actually won a bet with the US ambassador to Tokyo in January '68. We were watching, I was there as a UNESCO expert. We were watching TV together, and I looked at Lyndon Johnson and I said, that guy is not going to run for re-election. Why did I say that? I was talking about Vietnam and was moistening his lips all the time. When somebody moists his lips, things are running bad. The mouth dries up. So when I'm having a dialogue, I'm looking at the tongues and the lips. And I have a lot of other things. You may call it body language. Well, the ambassador betted against me, and I was very sorry that I had only betted about one bottle of whiskey. I got it. I should have said a case. So there is this factor, you see, of the psychology of the people at the top. And when they run out of steam, and how persuasive they are against the other forces. But this is a thing I cannot get into. Maybe I should. Maybe I should be more active in it. Maybe I should be better at suggesting alternative business and things of that type. Could be. To me, WikiLeaks is not so important because of what it says about US. The US is slightly egocentric, so they are only catching up on that point. And revealing that Hillary Clinton is instructing US diplomats to spy on UN, including their credit card numbers. It's ugly. Not to reveal it, but what she has done is ugly. Not exactly new. You may know what New York Times said, that in the Twin Towers was the CIA office of spying on the United Nations, and tried to recruit some of the ambassadors to become agents on the CIA payroll. So you can imagine that when the buildings went down, people came up from Washington to try to find the hard disks before anybody else found them. I'm still wondering who found the hard disk and when it will be published, but let's leave that aside. I think WikiLeaks has done something much more important. They have shown what the bad, inadequate, lousy institution diplomacy is. I see it as not anti-US empire, but anti-diplomacy. They show diplomats who are totally incapable of analyzing conflicts, who are only working to promote their own nation's interest, that's what they're paid for, and do that by puerile, puberty-type characteristics of leaders on the other side, and asking stupid questions whether she is on medication or things of that type, where they should have asked questions about the economic situation between Argentina and US and learned from it. They're inadequate as a profession. And I would hope that WikiLeaks could continue. So I have launched a new name for it, Weekly Leaks. Let us say every Monday at 9 o'clock to get our most recent diplomatic revelations. It's an institution up for renewal. Namely, not only seeing their own nation, but seeing the world from above, and being able to understand conflict and to come up with solutions. If you follow the logic of the leaks, it's to get rid of somebody in the other country. You can get rid of it through killing, asking your agents to do a kill, through poisoning, having somebody put something in the food. For instance, stewardesses on a plane when they are traveling by plane. Doesn't cost that much to buy a stewardess for that. You can do it that way, which is vulgar. Or you can do it away by supporting the opposition in the next presidential campaign. Or you can spread rumors about the person or things of that kind. There are many ways of doing it. Now, what a kind of lousy game is that? It's actor-oriented, person-oriented, individual-oriented, when we are dealing with deep, profound problems. For instance, between Saudi Arabia and the United States after March 1945. And the implication of March 1945 is known as 9/11. I'm now sitting in the United States of America. I happen to know people close to Al-Qaeda. I've done my own little analysis, and I think I know why 9/11 happened. 98% sure. Only 98%. The point is that I know perfectly well that this topic is taboo in the US. The only person who has come close to it is a columnist in New York Times. She's a woman, brilliant, with a fantastic command of English, but I'll not mention the name. People can guess. So there we are. If you're in a country that is not able to analyze its own conflicts, maybe because the diplomats are not able to do it either. And there should have been oceans of cables that would have told them. Well, some of those cables would have been leaked by now. Haven't seen them. So here comes my little story. What happened in March 1945 was on an aircraft carrier in the Suez Canal. It was on the last acts by the US President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a brilliant man, and the King of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud, also a brilliant man. And the treaty was a treaty with two basic points. Point one was clear. Roosevelt was convinced that oil was the key to power. And you know how they were fighting in Caucasus about the oil close to the Caspian Sea. And Stalingrad was the turning point, because Stalingrad was the access point down the Volga. So the treaty was point one, practically speaking, unlimited access to the oil sources. Point two is the important one. The United States obligates itself to come to the rescue of the royal house in case it is attacked by its own people. Now, at that time, the alarm bells should have been ringing. I'm not quoting it absolutely correctly, but to that effect. Now, why should that be? Because Saudi Arabia has Wahhabism, which is a branch of Sunni Islam. And the basic point from Abd al-Wahhab in the 18th century 1703 to 1789, I think, more or less it was. He filled the 18th century. He was a kind of Martin Luther of Sunni Islam, the sort of renovator. Let's get rid of the corruption. Let's go down to the basics. And the basics, according to him, was life as it was lived at the time of the Prophet, the good life. There was no oil, no Cadillacs, nothing of the type. It was Puritan. It was as Puritan as the Puritanism that emerged in England 1 century later and went by ship to the USA. The ship is called Mayflower, the flower of May. Very famous. The Pilgrims, the Founding Fathers, the Plymouth Rock. So, Abdul Wahab said one more thing. The Prophet said before he died, in this country there shall be no two religions. The Americans brought in engineers who were Christian and Jewish, and they brought in soldiers who were Christian and Jewish. This was against the doctrine, Wahhabism being the religion. Now, Saudi Arabia is then split down the middle between those who go for the oil treaty, protection treaty, and those who go for Abdul Wahab and the original teachings. This down the middle applies to the royal house. They're divided. I'm not at all saying where the majority is, I don't know. I only know that the 9/11 planning came from Saudi Arabs. Did not come from Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is a Saudi Arab, although it's more Yemenite. And he's of a rich family, as we all know, and his family was leaning more to US. So he was very active in Afghanistan, very, very active. He's been active other places too. He's very verbal. He's the Minister of Public Relations, but not the Minister of Execution. I think he's the one who puts it in words. I think 9/11 came as a surprise to him. That I'm not sure, but I've heard many people say it. Now he came with a speech in very nearby, very close to 9/11, which by definition was 11 September. And it is included in the book in published in America in English of his 26 first speeches, where he says, "You are now suffering the humiliation that happened to us more than 80 years ago." I was in my close to Washington apartment at the time. Did I go into my history books? But I knew it in advance. 2001 minus 80 is 1921. But the guy said more than. So let us say that more than means maximum 5 years, because otherwise he would have said less than 90. Okay, 1916, 1917, 1918, what happened? 1916, the Sykes-Picot treason. The English and French foreign minister telling the Arabs, if you rise against the Ottomans, you will be free. They rose against the Ottomans. French colonized Syria and Lebanon, France. England colonized Palestine and Iraq. That's what's called freedom. Every single Arab school child knows this. I almost never found an Englishman or a Frenchman who knows it. It's a basic thing. 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Balfour was strongly anti-Semitic. He wanted the Jews out of the country. So we talked about the Jewish homeland. Now, homeland is not in international law. There's no such thing. They didn't say state. Homeland, where they could feel at home. Get them out, get them out, get them out. Okay, they got out, they started settling. And did they settle? And I belong to those who have said, who believe in the legitimacy of a state with a Jewish character. 1918, what happened? Occupation of the capital of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul. The capitulation and the utter humiliation. Now, what more do you ask for? than those three combined. So Osama bin Laden knows his history, he knows much more than I do, and if you read his speeches, it's an interesting combination of so much historical details that he could get a professorship in history, and so much Quranic detail that he could get a professorship in Muslim theology, if you will. I've been told by Arabs that his Arabic is absolutely beautiful. He has a fantastic command. Talented man. So who did it then? Well, Saudi Arabians via the technical high school in Hamburg, via some pilot schools in the US. As you understand, I do not belong to those who think the US did it against themselves. I think that's nonsense. Franklin Roosevelt provoked the Japanese into Pearl Harbor, and the Japanese fell into the trap. Stupid Japanese. A little bit too clever Roosevelt. There's a book about it. And that story I think I know relatively well. The 8 provocations. Now, Building 7 next to the Twin Towers is another story. But we don't have to open that one. There might have been something operating. Probably Mossad, and they were exported out of the country immediately. They wanted the United States to expand its fight to be anti the Muslim world. They wanted the Muslims to be blamed, and maybe they knew about the planned Saudi Arabian attack. Mossad is much more clever than CIA. Clever people, well informed. And I think they can dress up better and infiltrate much better, and they're probably in the inner circles of Al-Qaeda. An American talking with an American drawl would have much more difficulty, to put it that way. Now, I know perfectly well that CIA have people who can dress up perfectly well too, I know. So, it's not an absolute distinction. They cooperate, and they're sometimes at loggerheads, as we know, to get the Americans fully into it. Because their goal is not only to tranquilize and inactivate and incapacitate Palestinians, but also to do the same with Iraq and other neighboring countries. Iran today being an example. Now this happened in 2001. Iran was already on the horizon. Iraq certainly was on the horizon and was invaded in 20 March 2003 by Iraqi calendar, 19 March by the American one. If you accept the idea of Zionism as being expansive, I would not necessarily say into Iraq. They know perfectly well that they will come up against enemies and strong resistance. They might like US to help them in that case. In other words, they might US to bite into the sour apple that this is not a question of some Palestinians, refugees or not, but it's a question of much more than that. So that would be one answer to it, and an important one. Now, this is a question of dog and tail and who is wagging whom. I won't say that I know too much about it, but I can tell you something. When it comes to forward thinking, brilliant planning, I would make my bet on Mossad. And I've been not fighting, but since very many of my best friends in this world are Jewish, and they are Jewish American, I've been struck by their brilliance. And I've been asking, as a social scientist, where does that brilliance come from? And so I don't believe it's genetic. Well, if you go back in history, one answer is, of course, that in the ghettos, their range of occupation was limited. They had to walk with the brain more than with their hands because they had no land to put their hands on. So up came money and science. Next, they selected the best boys and gave them fellowships to study to other countries. They were sent to Vilnius. Maybe they became rabbis in the first round. Then they selected the girls for them. They had selective breeding, just like they breed animals. So maybe they selected the brightest girls to marry the brightest boys. Maybe that's one factor. But there's another factor which is much more important. I go further back in history. I go to the Talmud, not the Torah. The Torah is by and large the Old Testament. The Talmud is dialogical. There is no eternal truth. The truth is the dialogue. The truth is the search. Now that is what intellectuals are about. It's to ask questions. The moment you stop asking questions, you're no longer an intellectual. You become a missionary or something like that. Maybe a missionary for your own book or whatever it is. And you see, if you now look at me, I'm 80. And I discovered at an early stage that the key is to continue asking questions. It's like the little child, Dad, why is that? I don't understand it, tell me. Okay, I'll try to. Dad, I don't understand that either, tell me. See, that's the spirit. The children are intellectuals. The Jews are intellectuals. They are trained that way. So when 70% of the professors at the 20 best universities in the United States of America are Jewish, it may be because they are the best. There is some cliquishness, is it? Obviously. I mean, you have cliques everywhere and somebody's helping somebody. I'm not blaming that. I'm not saying they are born cliquish. You have WASP cliques, you have some Italian cliques known as mafias and things of that kind. Okay. I'm just saying that here you have something. So I would expect Mossad to think more, but they could be a little bit too clever. And of course the book by Stephen Walt and Mearsheimer about AIPAC is saying that you have been too clever. And this is now causing counter-reactions. And I have, of course, as a social scientist, a prediction. When the US empire goes further down and the US economy goes further down, Americans start asking the question, who's to blame for this? Because American thinking is very person-oriented and they want to find the bad guy. And you'll get quite a lot of anti-Semitism coming up. The dog will blame the tail. They're playing a dangerous game. So, it's a prognosis. Let's see what happens. What I would hope would be that the dog would tell the tail, stop it. You are now becoming a liability. You are dragging us into things that are not in our interest. In our interest is a peaceful solution in the Middle East. And I would of course say you want one, Middle East community. But you have to tame the tail a little bit. You see, start wagging that much and we won't recommend another dog instead. We will ask you to look at your size. It's a little bit small. Be a little bit more modest. When did this happen? United States of America told the apartheid government in South Africa exactly that. We are no longer with you, you have become a liability. Out they went. So this is a scenario. It's not going to happen with the current president, whose major financier was Goldman Sachs. Slightly Jewish, as the name indicates. Slightly, maybe a soft term. Jews for Obama, American Jews for Obama was his major support organization back in 2004 when it started. The elections were, of course, by definition, November 2008. So I think he is in the fold. And the idea that the United States exercised pressure on Netanyahu in order to have him stop the settlers continuing is ridiculous. If Washington, with all its might, cannot stop a couple of bulldozers, what can they stop? Well, maybe they didn't want to stop it. So, out, say goodbye to the negotiations, and up will come a number of very disagreeable things for Israel. I mentioned one of them. down the line you will find Washington at one point saying, it's enough tail, we are the dog, stop it. I think renegotiate the 1945 agreement. Say that it would have been better if it had been undone, could be undone. We made a mistake, you don't have to apologize. You see, I don't like that apology thing. Much better to distance yourself from what you did, saying, that was not a very bright thing to do. I should have listened, I should have understood better. And you will get a lot of sympathy on the other side. Then you may ask the question, where do we go from now? It's a perfectly legitimate question. You dismantle the bases you have in Saudi Arabia. You have one of them in Qatar. Qatar is not Saudi Arabia, but it is the Arab Peninsula. From a Muslim point of view, it is sacred territory. Be careful. You might also say that this is linked to our operations in Iraq. Well, that's another chapter, and I have lots of ideas about that one. But you reopen 1945, you dismantle the bases, you ask, where do we go from now? And here is what I would like to hear. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest exporters, US is one of the biggest consumers. The biggest. Saudi Arabia is actually the biggest exporter. Iran is potentially the biggest exporter. So have a Saudi Arabian-US dialogue. How could we reduce the export from your side and the import from our side 5% per year by increasing green energy 5%? How could we do that? You Saudis have a lot of sunshine. It doesn't look like you have used it very much. We have lots of wind down in Texas, for instance. Now, how can we cooperate here? Build down the oil, build up the other side. You might even outcompete the Chinese. Right now, the Chinese have a lead in that game. But you have to cooperate, because the Saudis will lose a lot of income, and the US will have to reconstruct itself, reinvent itself.